You should not listen to your psychologist. You should not see a therapist. You do not need therapy. You do not need psychiatry. You do not need a psychologist. You do not need group of any sort. Codependence Anonymous or something, CODA or whatever. And you do not need Alcoholics Anonymous. You do not need Narcotics Anonymous. You do not need Sexaholics Anonymous. You do not need Overeaters Anonymous. And you do not need a group therapy session for people with mental illness. You do not need a family session, group therapy for if you're, for family members of people with mental illness. You do not need group therapy, and you do not need therapy. You do not need counseling. You do not need that. You do not have any benefit from that. That is true. That is real. You do not need that. That is my thesis. The antithesis is, or that is my antithesis. The thesis is group therapy, Gestalt therapy. I have been victim of twice a Gestalt therapy. It is a victim too. That they make a victim of one person in this large group, usually. And well, when it happened for me, it was in a 28-day treatment facility called Mountain Vista Farm in Glen Ellen, California. And it was 2000, the year 2000. And it was January. Well, it could have been February by then. I was there from, middle of January 12th, till basically February 10th or something like that. And then a halfway house called Shania House on Hohen Avenue in Santa Rosa, California, for 5 or 6 months or something. 6 months, I think. And the whole thing behind that was 28-day rehab, 12 steps indoctrination, basically forcing 12 steps on people. And I was not a drug person. I had only smoked weed at that point. And the reason that it was bad was because of all the psych meds I was taking. Seroquel, Prozac, Abilify, Depakote, what else? I don't know. Geodon, Zoloft, did I say that? I don't know, a whole bunch. Even Benadryl and all these drugs. Plus weed, not a good combination. And I lost my townhouse. I lived in a nice townhouse, but because I had smoked weed in the townhouse, I was kicked out of the townhouse. Anyways, long story short, Gestalt therapy, they all sat around in a circle. Well, I sat basically in a swivel chair with 30 and 40, whatever, people around me, all my peers that were also in the 28-day rehab facility. And I was talking about God, and I got in trouble for talking about God, which is the only true solution. But they didn't like that, and so they twisted the Bible. A man named Jeff, who was supposed to be a Christian, therapist or something, and I was a real Christian, and I am a real Christian. I don't know about him, but he was certainly preaching heresy, because I sat in this circle of, I was in the center of the room, and I was selected to undergo what is called Gestalt therapy. And it is an old German form of torture, basically, that they used in Auschwitz concentration camp, I think. I might be making that up. I'm not for sure about that. But it is an old form of it is an old form of German therapy, psychology, psychiatry, counseling, group therapy. It's Marxism, because Karl Marx was the first one to introduce social therapy to a society, and that's where the word therapy came from, was from Karl Marx and Marxism. And he was the first therapist. So at any rate, they one at a time told me what a piece of crap I was, and I, took it and said, thank you, man. Thank you. You're helping me out, Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it. Oh, I wish I had an AK-47 and they try that again. I would just kill all 40 people. No, I wouldn't do that. But, because I didn't know any better. Well, here it is 16 years later, just about, more than 16 years later, and I figured out that 12 steps is baloney. I figured out that psychiatry is baloney, and therapy and all that stuff is a belief. It's not needed. It's not the Christian belief, and all the Christians in my life at that time were endorsing that. They were supportive of it, and they shouldn't have been. I would never be supportive of anybody. I'm a Christian. I'm a teacher of the Bible, and I'm a Bible college graduate. I have 5 years paid experience in the ministry. I still minister on a volunteer basis almost every day of my life. I teach the word. I preach the gospel to over 10,000 people in my life over a period of 20 or 21 years. And I have one Bible degree, and I'm very close to another. And whatever that is, credentials or whatever, I'm telling you that psychology, psychiatry, anything 12 steps, anything to do with therapy, it's alternate. It's alternate. It is wrong. It's not the system in the scriptures. It's not included in the Bible. That is not Christian stuff. They told me this guy, Jeff, he walked around as the Christian representative to this, bad Christian. Basically, he was a good Christian and I was a bad Christian. I wasn't, though. Actually, he was a bad Christian. I was being a good Christian, but since he had 20 years of sobriety or something like that, that made him a good Christian and me a bad one because I only had 20 days. But that isn't what makes you a good or bad Christian, is it? No, it isn't. And there's no such thing as a good and bad Christian. There's such a thing as a spiritual Christian, and there's also the carnal Christian. Then there's a person that's not a Christian at all. That's the natural person. Then there's the carnal, then there's the spiritual. Natural, carnal, spiritual. Carnal and spiritual are Christian, saved people. Natural is an unsaved. That's the only three kinds of people that God sees. At this day, today, now. And he said, take the plank out of your own eye, read with Bible in hand, big old Bible, in front of everybody, and not most of those people in the room were Bible people, Christian people. Take the plank out of your own eye before you remove the speck in your neighbor's. And that is not for what we are doing today. That is not the Christian reality for the day. Today, we are not to take the plank out of our own eye before removing the speck in our neighbor's, and we're not supposed to remove the speck in our neighbor's eye at all. You see? That has nothing to do with the church. Okay? And has nothing to do with being a Christian. Jesus said that in a parable, and well, not in a parable. Jesus said those words, okay? And he was teaching, and it wasn't for the church. There was no such thing as a church when he taught that. Christians were first called Christians in Poseidon, Antioch. It says that. The book of Acts. There was no such thing as a Christian at that day. You couldn't be a Christian. When you were a disciple of Jesus during Jesus' ministry, you could not be a Christian. That wasn't being offered. You could be a disciple. You could not be a Christian. Today, you can't be a disciple. And what would Jesus do is not where it's at. And if you lived the life just like Jesus lived, you would not even be saved. You see? You wouldn't even go to heaven if you lived a life just like the Jesus, the real Jesus. If you lived a life identical to his, you would not go to heaven. That is not what God asks of you. God asks you to believe. And what puts you not going to heaven is not believing. That's the only unpardonable sin. You don't go to hell for murder and suicide and fornication and lying and idolatry. You go to hell because you do not believe. That's the one unpardonable sin today. There are no others. There's only one, and that is unbelief, the sin of unbelief. Unbelievers go to hell. Believers go to heaven. Believers are already in heaven, and unbelievers are not already in hell. Unbelievers will go to hell. They are not there yet. Believers are in heaven.